According to Nielsen IQ, data shows that by volume, sales for American food products are down by roughly 8.5%.
Huge in food retail. That's a boycott.
Canada just dropped a bombshell by boycotting U.S. food, and U.S. is losing its mind. Panic is spreading across trade circles as America scrambles to contain the fallout. What began as a simple dispute has now spiraled into a full-blown food war, shaking both nations.
71% of Canadian consumers say they intend to buy fewer American products this year. That's having an impact. The U.S. economy could lose up to 0.3% of its GDP, or about $90 billion in 2025, due to the boycott of American goods.
Ottawa just dropped a bomb. Canada is officially boycotting U.S. food imports. The moment the news hit, it was like a thunderclap across both sides of the border. Families were already struggling with record food insecurity. Food banks were running dry, and now this, a political move that turned grocery aisles into battlegrounds. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called it a stand for sovereignty, claiming Canada was defending its dignity after years of being pushed around in trade talks. But Washington didn't flinch. Officials there mocked it as a stunt that'll hurt Canadians more than America.
71% of Canadian consumers say they intend to buy fewer American products this year. That's having an impact.
The reaction was instant. Markets froze, grocers panicked, and hashtags like Circular's boycott UZET's food began flooding social media within hours. It wasn't just news, it was war talk. Provinces scrambled for answers, shoppers rushed to stock up, and talk shows couldn't keep up with the frenzy. Across Canada, one question echoed everywhere. Did Ottawa just declare war on dinner?
Canada imposed a 25% tariff on all U.S. alcohol products. A 25% tariff on distilled spirit imports from Mexico and Canada could cost more than 31,000 U.S. jobs.
This wasn't a random act of defiance. It had been building for months. Back in February 2025, Trudeau publicly urged Canadians to buy Canadian. That single phrase ignited the biggest consumer revolt the country had seen in decades. Then came March, when President Trump's White House slapped heavy tariffs on Canadian exports. Just 9 days later, Ottawa retaliated, hitting back with 25% tariffs on $29.8 billion worth of U.S. imports.
If there was a Canadian version and an American version, we probably already delisted the American version and supported the Canadian product because that's what our customers are looking for.
Over 1,800 American product lines, from beef to breakfast cereal, were suddenly more expensive overnight. It was economic warfare, wrapped in patriotism. Canada's message was clear. We won't be bullied. Washington's answer was colder than winter. Good luck feeding yourselves. Within days, the cross-border relationship began to crack. Truckers faced long inspections, trade routes slowed, and businesses that had relied on U.S. supplies for decades were suddenly scrambling. What started as a tariff fight quickly spiraled into something far more personal, a test of national pride.
Our customers are demanding from us as much Canadian product as possible. They're getting frustrated and upset when they see too much U.S. product.
Then came the real shocker. The people took over the movement. Polls showed 98% of Canadians were searching for made-in-Canada products, and 85% said they were actively replacing American goods. It wasn't just a political decision anymore, it was emotional. It was about loyalty, anger, and identity.
It's now government policy in British Columbia not to sell any American-made booze, a clap back at US tariffs on Canadian goods.
By March, over 1.2 million Canadians had joined a Facebook group dedicated to boycotting U.S. goods. Grocery stores rolled out massive Buy Canadian campaigns. Canadian apples sold out in hours, while U.S. ones sat untouched on the shelves. Cafes got creative too, renaming Americano coffee to Canadiano. The message was everywhere: support. Homegrown or don't bother coming in.
We've obviously seen the very visible and visceral reaction from markets to US policies, but it's very interesting to see from the consumer side what impact it's having. And these little acts of activism from consumers who have decided to turn their back on certain US products.
Even the tech world joined the movement. Apps like MapleScan and Buy Canadian shot to the top of App Store charts, helping shoppers identify which products were American-made. Scanning barcodes became a silent act of protest. Buying groceries turned into a show of patriotism. It wasn't just an economic shift, It was a cultural uprising.
Right now, you can only get them from the United States.
The most in demand and the hardest ones to replace from the US is typically berries, citrus, and greens, lettuce.
If there is produce from the US and produce from Canada, and they're the same, of course, I'll go Canadian, of course.
But every act of rebellion comes with a price, and this one hit hard. The $29.8 billion tariff wall might have hurt American exporters, but it also began slicing into Canada's own supply chains. By April 2025, imports of U.S. goods had dropped 43% compared to the previous year. Grocery shelves in Ontario and British Columbia started showing empty gaps. No more California strawberries, fewer Midwest grains, and American beef almost gone overnight.
Our wine business, roughly 35–40% of our red wine sales is California cabs and blends. So that's $60,000 a week in sales that are just gone. They've evaporated from the United States. We're replacing it, and we're replacing it with import wines from France, from South Africa, from Australia, from New Zealand.
Prices surged. Beef up 16%, coffee up 13%, vegetables up 4%. People who'd cheered for the boycott just weeks earlier were now staring at grocery bills that didn't make sense. Trudeau's administration called it temporary pain for long-term independence, but economists had another name for it: political suicide.
We've always been very pro-Canadian, even way before all this stuff happened. This just reinforced it.
The move that was meant to unite the country started to divide it. Some saw Trudeau as a visionary standing up to Washington. Others saw him as a gambler risking the kitchen table for pride. And as the weeks went by, that tension grew, from Parliament to corner stores, with everyone wondering just how far this boycott would really go. This is where the headlines stop and the hunger starts. In Ontario's quiet city of Orillia, the local council had to declare something that sounds straight out of a dystopian novel: a household food emergency. Yes, officially, because things weren't just bad, they were collapsing.
The height of when we are out of Canada's growing season, we could be upwards of 60%, 70% American produce, okay? Right now, we're only running at about 30%.
Food bank lines wrapped around blocks like never before. The numbers tell the story. Usage shot up from 14% to 31% of the population. That's nearly 1 in 3 people relying on donated food. And it's not just the unemployed or the elderly. Half the clients were working full-time. Chris Peacock, who runs the Sharing Place Food Bank, said it bluntly: half our clients work full-time, and they still can't afford to eat.
When I go to the grocery store, I look for the Canadian, the little maple leaf that a lot of grocery stores have put on the shelves to, try and purchase Canadian items or Mexican items, anything other than the United States.
Inside the food banks, it's chaos. Volunteers ration portions, shelves go bare before the month ends, and donations can't keep up with the tidal wave of need. Families are skipping dinners, parents are pretending they're not hungry so their kids can eat, and grocery bills have become the new horror story.
They went ahead and they added Made in Canada labels permanently onto the bag.
It's not a food issue, Peacock added. It's an income crisis, and the boycott just made it worse. And he's right. The boycott might have started as a patriotic punch, but for ordinary families, it turned into a punch straight to the stomach. The fridge became a battlefield, and there were no winners, just empty shelves and cold dinners.
Look like they're going to last for the duration of the Trump administration in one form or another. That's going to keep other countries kind of in a negative mood towards U.S.
Across the border, they're not panicking, they're laughing. U.S. officials brushed off Ottawa's move faster than a mosquito bite. One senior trade advisor even joked, "America has more buyers than sellers. They'll feel it first." In D.C., it wasn't seen as an act of defiance. It was a comedy skit. While Canada scrambled to replace imports, U.S. farmers rerouted billions in exports to Asia and Europe within weeks. No drama, no panic, just business as usual. Washington's attitude was basically, "You want to play tough? Cool, we'll sell somewhere else."
Canadian flags and labels mark domestic goods in aisles, while apps like MapleScan help shoppers identify origin.
That cold indifference stung more than any tariff, because while American producers moved on, Canada was left counting losses, juggling shortages, and realizing that economic independence wasn't as easy as a campaign slogan. For the U.S., it was a minor trade hiccup. For Canada, It was like watching your plan to make a statement backfire, loudly and publicly.
You're seeing more products from around the world, from Mexico, Peru, South Africa, Egypt.
The new crop for New Zealand apples.
And it hasn't always been easy.
And that's when the cracks started showing, not just in the economy, but in the country itself. Provincial leaders turned on Ottawa. Alberta and Saskatchewan openly accused Trudeau's government of gambling with survival. Ontario warned that its food banks were collapsing under demand. Suddenly, what was supposed to unite Canadians turned them against each other.
And is this just a political statement or a permanent shift in buying behavior? CNBC went to Canada to find out.
Protesters flooded the streets of major cities. Outside Parliament, people held up signs reading, "Feed families, not politics." Parents brought their kids to rallies, shouting about how pride doesn't put food on the table. Meanwhile, social media lit up with a wave of embarrassing stories. Families driving across the U.S. border just to buy affordable groceries. Gas prices didn't matter anymore. Survival did.
The app will scan what that product is, figure out what it is, the label, look up information online about it, essentially compile all that information together into a product page to kind of give you information about like the company's history, who it's been owned by in the past versus now, what are its Canadian ties.
The once proud Shorer Boycott Use Yes food campaign now looked like a bad joke. What started as a stand for sovereignty had turned into a slow-motion collapse of public confidence. Even die-hard supporters began to question if the government had planned this out at all, or if it was just a stunt that spiraled out of control. The boycott, once seen as patriotic, had become a national humiliation.
$221 million in distilled spirits and $41 million in beer to Canada. The loss to the U.S. is a boon to Canada, with the Buy Canada movement adding roughly $10 billion to the country's economy.
By August 2025, the economic scoreboard was brutal. Canada's merchandise trade deficit ballooned to $6.32 billion. Imports were choking, exports were falling, and the supposed independence movement looked more like self-sabotage. And here's the kicker. Even after all the chaos, 85% of Canada-US trade was still tariff-free thanks to the USMCA agreement. Translation: for all the noise, Canada was still deeply tied to the very economy it was trying to punish. The country hadn't broken free. It had just broken its balance.
Who would agree with the statement that Canada is a substantial part of the problem in the United States? It's simply a fiction. It's simply a lie.
The public mood hit rock bottom. In British Columbia, 59% of residents said they felt financially paralyzed. Over half, 54%, were spending their entire income just to survive. And 57% admitted they no longer believed they'd ever get ahead. And yet, the government kept repeating, "We're doing this for sovereignty." But on the ground, sovereignty didn't mean much when you couldn't afford dinner.
On to a customer from last week that came in and felt like we had too much American product, and they told us they're not going to shop at our store anymore.
Editorial boards across the country had a field day. One headline read, "Economic Masochism, Ottawa's New National Hobby." Another simply asked, was this worth starving for? Even loyal Liberals, the ones who'd defended Trudeau through every scandal and storm, started whispering about early elections if things didn't cool off soon. Somewhere between the slogans and the shortages, reality hit. This wasn't about sovereignty anymore. It was about survival. What started as a proud message of independence had morphed into a harsh lesson on just how dependent Canada still was.
The biggest challenge is supply, getting people to bring it in. And so, we're taking more than we normally would just to have it, right?
The truth was ugly. Canada's agricultural sector simply couldn't fill the gap. Expanding production, building supply chains, retooling industries. That takes years, not weeks. And the country didn't have years. By mid-year, food inflation was projected to rise another 3 to 5%, with meat and vegetables taking the biggest hit.
I think it's great because I've seen products I've never seen before.
Families were being forced into impossible choices. Rent or dinner, groceries or gas. National pride doesn't mean much when your kid is hungry. All those fiery speeches about sovereignty suddenly sounded hollow next to the sound of an empty stomach. Even the most loyal supporters began to admit it. The boycott wasn't about strength anymore. It was about sheer, blinding stubbornness. What started as a bold declaration of independence had morphed into a desperate attempt to save face. Ottawa's "Stand for Sovereignty" was now less of a statement and more of a warning, a textbook example of how not to play power politics on the world stage.
As shoppers push their carts through the door, Urban Grocer is quietly pushing back.
Behind the speeches and slogans, the reality was brutal. Shelves were thinning, prices were climbing, and families were quietly paying the price for a political gamble gone wrong. What was supposed to make Canada look strong had instead made it look isolated, scrambling to fix a crisis it had created. Every press conference sounded more defensive, every promise more hollow. And for ordinary Canadians, the message was clear. Pride doesn't put food on the table.
The trend might fall off the cliff, but we're going to stay true to it. You know, you can do it. It takes some effort. It's not easy, but it's well worth it.
What was meant to be a show of strength had become a global embarrassment. Ottawa had set out to teach Washington a lesson. But in the end, it looked more like a warning label for political hubris. By fall, there was no denying it. Trudeau's grand plan had officially collapsed. The boycott had exposed just how fragile Canada's economy really was. It proved that symbolic politics can sound great on stage, but can starve real people at the dinner table.
He decided to, see what we could do to combat that.
Every grocery trip became a reality check. Bread, meat, and milk weren't just pricier. They symbolized the real cost of political games. Families felt the pressure, small businesses took the hit, and Canada's "Stand for Independence" began to look more like self-inflicted isolation. The boycott didn't rewrite trade power. It exposed how fragile that power really was. And just when it seems like the chaos can't get worse, the tease drops with a chilling edge. If this is what happens over food, wait till you see what's coming for energy. Like, share, and subscribe, because we're not done exposing the madness.